The Drylands mountain range held no mercy for the unprepared. Tonight, it showed none to Viper Recon either. Sergeant Jake Morrison pressed his back against the cold granite, feeling the vibrations of incoming mortars through the stone. His radio crackled with static and desperate voices. 300 meters below their position, muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like fireflies made of death. Viper 6, this is Viper 2. I count at least 40 hostiles. Repeat, 4-0. We're cut off from the southern route. The voice belonged to Corporal Emma Davis, somewhere in the rocks to his left. Morrison wiped blood from his temple. The ambush had come from nowhere. One moment, they were conducting routine reconnaissance on suspected weapons caches. The next, the mountain had erupted with gunfire from 3 directions simultaneously. He glanced at his team. 5 soldiers huddled in a depression barely 30 feet wide. Private First Class Ryan Chen clutched his side where shrapnel had torn through his vest. Specialist Marcus Webb applied pressure to the wound, his hands already dark with blood. Lance Corporal Sarah Bennett maintained their only functional machine gun position, her face a mask of concentration as she fired controlled bursts into the advancing enemy. Staff Sergeant Derek Walsh crawled up beside Morrison. His left arm hung useless, the bone clearly fractured. "Sir, we need to move. They're flanking us from the ridge." Morrison knew what Walsh meant. They were surrounded. The narrow gorge that should have been their escape route was now a killing zone. Thermal imaging dots danced across the rocks, enemy drones mapping their positions. "How many magazines left?" Morrison asked. "I'm down to 2. Chen is unconscious now. Bennett has maybe 300 rounds for the gun. Webb is out of grenades." The math was simple and brutal. 12 enemies for every one of them. No air support possible in this weather. No reinforcements within 50 miles. The fog that rolled through these mountains would ground any helicopter attempt until dawn 4 hours away. Morrison pulled out his emergency beacon. The small device felt impossibly light in his palm. He'd never used one before. In 12 years of service, he'd never been in a situation where pressing that button seemed like anything but defeat. Davis, Walsh, Bennett, anyone got a better idea? He kept his voice level, professional. That's what they needed from him now. The silence spoke volumes. Davis responded first. "We knew the risks, Sarge. Do what you have to do." Morrison activated the beacon. The device emitted no sound, no light. Somewhere, encrypted signals bounced through military satellites, screaming into the void that Viper Recon needed help they wouldn't receive in time. He set it down and picked up his rifle. "Then we make them earn it, every single one of them." Bennett adjusted her grip on the machine gun. "How long do we hold?" "Until we can't." Another mortar round impacted 50 feet away, showering them with debris. Morrison counted the seconds between flashes. The enemy was moving methodically, professionally. These weren't local militia. These were trained soldiers with night vision, drones, and enough ammunition to level the entire mountainside. Chen groaned, briefly regaining consciousness. Webb gave him water, whispered something Morrison couldn't hear. The fog thickened. Visibility dropped to 30 meters. Morrison checked his weapon one last time. 19 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. He'd fired thousands of rounds in training, hundreds in combat. These last 20 felt like they weighed more than all the others combined. Above them, an enemy flare burst through the clouds, turning night into day for 10 terrible seconds. That's when the first impossible shot rang out from the northern ridge. The grenade landed 3 feet from Davis's position. She saw it bounce once against the rock, watched it roll toward the depression where Webb was still working on Chen. Her mind processed the information with the strange clarity that comes in moments of pure terror. Approximately 2 seconds until detonation. No time to throw it back. No time to run. Davis threw herself over Chen's body. The explosion lifted her into the air. She felt the pressure wave before the pain, felt herself flying before she understood she'd been hit. She landed hard, ears ringing, vision blurred. Something warm ran down her leg. "Davis is down. Davis is down." Walsh's voice sounded distant, underwater. Morrison low-crawled to her position, dragging a medical kit. He worked fast, applying tourniquets, checking for arterial bleeding. "Stay with me, Emma. You're going to be fine." She wanted to believe him. But she'd seen enough combat to know the truth. She'd taken shrapnel in her left leg and right arm. Without proper medical attention within the hour, she'd bleed out or lose the limbs to infection. They didn't have an hour. Bennett's machine gun clicked empty. She dropped behind cover, fumbling for her last belt of ammunition. 60 rounds left. That's it. The enemy seemed to sense their weakness. The assault intensified. Automatic weapons fire poured into their position from multiple angles. The rocks around them disintegrated under the barrage, filling the air with stone fragments that cut like glass. Morrison pressed himself flat as tracer rounds drew lines of light overhead. His tactical computer showed 12 red hostile markers closing in. The actual number was probably double that. The system couldn't track what it couldn't see through the fog and smoke. "Ryan, I need you awake." Webb shook Chen, trying to rouse him. The young soldier's eyes fluttered but didn't open. His breathing was shallow, rapid, classic signs of shock. A drone buzzed overhead, its thermal camera no doubt feeding their exact positions to the enemy commander. Walsh fired at it, missed. The drone circled lazily, untouchable, patient. Private First Class Jordan Hayes, their communications specialist, crouched next to Morrison. He was 19 years old. This was his first real deployment. His hands shook as he tried to establish contact with headquarters. "Sir, I can't get through. They're jamming everything." The beacon signal went out, but I don't know if anyone received it. Morrison gripped his shoulder. "Keep trying." But he knew, they all knew. The nearest friendly unit was conducting operations 70 miles east. By the time they got the message, organized a rescue, and fought through to this position, it would be dawn. And Viper Recon would be bodies cooling in the mountain wind. Another explosion, this one closer. Morrison felt heat wash over his back, smelled burning fabric. His vest had taken some of the blast, but his right side felt like someone had pressed a blowtorch against it. Bennett started firing again. Short, desperate bursts. She was aiming at shadows now, at muzzle flashes, at anything that moved. Her jaw was set, her eyes hard. If they were going down, she'd make sure the enemy remembered this position. Walsh crawled over, his face gray with pain. "Jake, they're moving up the western approach. Maybe 15 guys. They'll be on us in 2 minutes." Morrison nodded slowly. He pulled out his sidearm, checked the chamber. 15 rounds, against 15 trained soldiers. The math kept getting worse. He looked at his team. Davis bleeding, Chen unconscious, Hayes terrified, Webb exhausted, Walsh broken. Bennett down to her last moments of ammunition. This was where Viper Recon would make its final stand. Then, from somewhere in the darkness to the north, a single rifle shot cracked through the night. The sound was wrong. Morrison had heard thousands of gunshots. He could identify weapons by their acoustic signature: the sharp crack of an AK-47, the deeper boom of a 308 hunting rifle, the distinctive pop of a suppressed submachine gun. This shot didn't match anything in his experience. It was distant, precise, and utterly out of place in the chaos of the firefight. 3 seconds later, an enemy soldier collapsed on the western approach. The man simply dropped his weapon and fell forward, as if someone had cut his strings. His squadmates froze, scanning for threats. Another shot, another body. What the hell? Bennett stopped firing, her attention drawn to the confusion spreading through the enemy ranks. Morrison raised his night vision scope toward the northern ridge. Nothing, just rocks, fog, and darkness. The shot had come from at least 600 meters away, maybe more. In these conditions, with this wind, with this limited visibility, that kind of accuracy was impossible. Walsh grabbed his arm. "Jake, look. They're falling back on the western side." It was true. The enemy squad that had been moments from overrunning their position was now retreating, dragging their dead, seeking cover. Their advance had transformed into disorder. A third shot rang out. A fourth, both from different positions, or at least different angles. 2 more hostiles went down. Hayes stared into the darkness. "Who's shooting? Are those ours?" "Can't be," Morrison said. "We don't have anyone in that sector. No friendlies within 50 miles. But someone was out there. Someone with exceptional skill, superior equipment, and apparently no concern for the 12-to-1 odds they were facing." Bennett's tactical radio crackled. She listened, then reported, "Sir, I'm picking up enemy comms. They're panicking, saying they're taking fire from an unknown position. Their spotter is down. They've lost contact with their sniper team." Morrison processed this. The enemy had brought their own designated marksmen to this fight, professionals who should have been nearly impossible to eliminate at range. Yet someone had just taken them out. The incoming fire slackened. The enemy was reorganizing, trying to locate this new threat. Their disciplined assault had dissolved into defensive confusion. "Do we move?" Walsh asked. Morrison weighed the options. They were still surrounded, still outnumbered, still wounded. But the pressure had lifted. For the first time in 30 minutes, they weren't seconds from being overrun. "Not yet. We don't know who's shooting. Could be friendly. Could be a rival militia group with their own agenda." Another shot echoed from the darkness. This time, Morrison tracked it better. The sound came from the high ground, roughly 800 meters northwest. That position overlooked the entire battlefield, a perfect sniper nest. An enemy machine gun position erupted in flames as their ammunition cooked off. Someone had hit their stockpile with an incendiary round. The fog shifted, revealing brief glimpses of the landscape. Morrison caught movement on a distant outcropping, a shadow that didn't belong, there one instant and gone the next. Too small for a man, too deliberate to be an animal. "I've got thermal on the northern ridge," Bennett said, studying her scope. Single signature. Small, moving between positions after every few shots. How small? Maybe 5 to 5, 5 to 6. Light build. She looked up, confused. "Sir, I think it's a woman." Morrison didn't respond. He was watching another enemy soldier fall, this one at least 900 meters from that northern position. The shot had compensated for wind, elevation, and the target's movement, a calculation that required years of training and natural talent few possessed. Whoever she was, she'd just bought them time. The question was, what would she do with it? Her call sign was Lynx. Her real name was classified in files that required 3 levels of clearance to access. She'd been operating alone in these mountains for 11 days, tracking a high-value target through a network of caves and smuggling routes. The mission was supposed to be pure reconnaissance, observe, document, report. No engagement unless absolutely necessary. Then she'd intercepted the emergency beacon. Lynx had studied the signal for 30 seconds before making her decision. The beacon's encryption identified it as U.S. military. The coordinates placed it 6 miles from her position. The terrain between was hostile in every sense, enemy-controlled, treacherous, and completely unsupported. Her orders were clear: maintain radio silence, continue surveillance, complete the primary objective. She'd ignored those orders without hesitation. Now she lay prone on a granite shelf, her ghillie suit blending perfectly with the rock and sparse vegetation. Her rifle, a custom Macmillan TAC 338, rested on its bipod, the suppressor still warm from the last shot. She'd fired 9 rounds in the past 8 minutes, 9 targets eliminated. Lynx worked the bolt, chambering a fresh round. The mechanical precision of the action centered her, as it always did. Breathing slowed. Heart rate dropped. The chaos of the battlefield reduced to simple geometry: angles, distances, wind values, and human targets. She'd learned this stillness as a child, hunting with her father in the Montana wilderness. He'd taught her patience, taught her to see what others missed, taught her that the quietest hunters brought home the most game. The military had refined those skills into something far deadlier. Through her scope, she watched the enemy reorganize. They were good professional soldiers who understood combined arms tactics and fire discipline. They'd correctly identified that they were under attack from an elevated position to the northwest. They were now establishing a defensive perimeter, using smoke to obscure her line of sight, and preparing a counter-sniper element. She noted the commander, a tall man with the radio, directing troops with hand signals, high-value target, but taking him now would be impulsive. She needed to think 3 moves ahead. The scope swept across the battlefield, cataloging threats. Enemy machine gun nest at 270 degrees, effective range on the trap squad below. Enemy mortar team at 330 degrees, preparing another barrage. Enemy assault element at 315 degrees, trying to flank under cover of smoke. Priority: mortar team. They represented the greatest immediate threat to the surrounded Americans. Lynx adjusted for the 1100-meter distance. Wind 3/4 value from the east, approximately 8 miles per hour. Temperature dropping as fog rolled in bullets, would fly slightly higher in cold air. She compensated. The mortar gunner bent over his tube, preparing to drop a round. Lynx's breathing reached the natural pause between exhale and inhale. In that moment of perfect stillness, she pressed the trigger. The rifle recoiled smoothly. Through the scope, she watched the gunner stagger backward, the mortar round falling harmlessly beside the tube. His teammates scattered. She worked the bolt, acquired the second mortarman, fired. The man dropped before he understood what was happening. The assistant gunner grabbed the radio, trying to call for help. Third shot. The radio exploded in his hands. 3 rounds, 3 targets. The mortar position was neutralized. Lynx rolled left, abandoning her position before the enemy could triangulate her location. She moved like water through the rocks, silent and fluid, already planning her next firing position. She'd learned long ago that the best snipers were defined not by their marksmanship but by their ability to remain invisible. The Americans below were still pinned, still wounded, still in danger. She had work to do. Lynx reached her secondary position, a narrow crevice between 2 massive boulders that provided both cover and an excellent view of the eastern approach. She settled in, checking her ammunition, 23 rounds remaining in her pack, not infinite, but enough. Through her scope, she observed the enemy's reaction. They'd gone defensive, which was smart, but defensive postures were static, predictable. Soldiers who stopped moving made easier targets. She studied the battlefield with the detachment of a surgeon examining an X-ray. Each hostile represented a problem to be solved. The machine gun nest was anchoring their western flank. The sniper team, 2 men with a spotter, was trying to locate her from a ridge to the south. The assault element had taken cover, but would inevitably try to advance again. Prioritize, sequence, execute. The machine gun nest first. She identified 3 personnel, the gunner, the assistant, and a security man with a rifle. They'd positioned themselves behind a natural rock wall, smart tactical thinking. But the gunner's head was visible when he aimed, and the assistant had to expose himself to feed the belt. Lynx calculated the range, 740 meters. Wind steady but gusting. She'd need to time the shot between gusts. She watched the pattern. The machine gun fired in bursts 6 to 8 rounds, then a pause while the assistant adjusted the belt. During that pause, the gunner raised his head slightly to check his field of fire. Patient, always patient. The machine gun rattled. 1 burst, 2, 3. Pause. The gunner's head lifted. Lynx fired. The gunner collapsed across his weapon. The assistant froze in confusion for 3 fatal seconds. Lynx had already cycled the bolt, acquired him in her crosshairs. Second shot. Second body. The security man made the mistake of standing to check on his teammates. Third shot. The machine gun fell silent. Below, Morrison and his team were adapting to this unexpected support. They'd recognized that someone was systematically dismantling the enemy's support weapons. Bennett had repositioned her own gun to cover the southern approach. Walsh, despite his broken arm, was ready with his rifle. Lynx shifted her attention to the sniper team. They were the real threat professionals who understood how she thought, who'd been trained in the same schools, who knew the same techniques. The spotter was glassing the ridgeline, searching for muzzle flash or scope glint. She waited until he looked the wrong direction. The distance was extreme, 970 meters. Uphill, through shifting fog. A shot that would make most military snipers hesitate. Lynx compensated for everything. The upward angle that would make the bullet drop less, the wind that would push it right, the temperature gradient that affected velocity. Her calculations were instinctive now, the product of 10,000 hours of training and 5 years of combat experience. The spotter's chest filled her scope's reticle. Fire. She didn't wait to confirm. She was already moving, already seeking her next position. Behind her, she heard the faint sound of someone screaming. Confirmation enough. The enemy sniper would be alone now, blind without his spotter, probably panicking. He'd either withdraw or make a mistake. Either outcome worked in her favor. 4 minutes had passed since she'd fired her first shot. In that time, she'd eliminated 9 hostiles and 3 weapon systems. The enemy's coordinated assault had deteriorated into scattered defensive positions. Viper Recon was still surrounded, still outnumbered. But they were no longer being systematically destroyed. Lynx chambered another round and scanned for her next target. The mathematics of war had shifted in their favor. Morrison couldn't believe what he was witnessing. The enemy force that had been methodically crushing them was now in disarray. their machine gun silent, their mortar team scattered, their sniper element compromised. All in less than 10 minutes. "Whoever she is," Walsh said, pressing his good arm against his broken one, "she's buying us time. We need to use it." Morrison agreed. "Bennett, can you suppress that squad on the eastern approach? Give me targets and I'll make them keep their heads down." Davis, "How are you holding up?" The corporal's voice was strained but steady. "I'll live, Sarge. Don't worry about me." But Morrison did worry. They all did. Davis needed a hospital, needed surgery, needed more than Webb could provide with a field medical kit. Chen was still unconscious, his breathing shallow. Every minute they stayed in this killing zone increased the risk of losing both of them. Hayes suddenly looked up from his radio. "Sir, I got through. Headquarters received our beacon. They're scrambling a QRF, but ETA is 90 minutes minimum." 90 minutes. Morrison did the math. With ammunition running this low, with casualties this severe, they couldn't hold for 90 minutes. Not against this many enemies. Unless their mysterious benefactor kept thinning the numbers. As if in response to his thought, another shot cracked through the night. An enemy officer fell, his radio sparking as the bullet passed through him and into the communications equipment. "She's targeting their command structure now," Walsh observed. "Smart. Without coordination, they're just individuals." Morrison watched through his scope as the enemy tried to reorganize. They were disciplined, professional, credit to their training. But they were also increasingly frightened. Soldiers could handle direct confrontation. What they couldn't handle was an invisible threat that struck without warning from unknown locations. He caught movement on the southern ridge. The enemy sniper was repositioning, trying to find an angle on whoever was protecting them. The man moved cautiously, using cover well. Not well enough. The shot came from a completely different direction than Morrison expected, from the east now, not the north. The enemy sniper spun and fell, his rifle clattering down the rocks. "She's moving between shots," Bennett said with something like awe in her voice. "Different positions every time. How is she doing that so fast?" Morrison had no answer. The distances involved were enormous. The terrain was brutal. Yet this woman was flowing through it like smoke, appearing just long enough to take a shot, then vanishing before anyone could return fire. The enemy commander made a decision. Morrison heard it over the radio frequency Hayes had managed to tap into. The man was calling for a withdrawal, not a retreat, but a tactical pullback to regroup and develop a better plan. Half the enemy force began moving south, using smoke grenades to cover their withdrawal. They'd be back, probably with reinforcements, probably with heavier weapons, but for now, the immediate pressure was lifting. "Hold fire," Morrison ordered. "Let them go. Conserve ammunition." His team lowered their weapons, hardly daring to believe the respite. The battlefield grew quieter. The fog thickened. Within minutes, visibility dropped to almost nothing. Morrison stood slowly, painfully. His ribs were probably cracked from the explosion earlier. Everything hurt. But they were alive. "Hayes, signal our guardian angel. Tell her we're grateful, and ask if she needs support." The young soldier transmitted the message on an open frequency. The response came back almost immediately, in text form. "Negative. Maintain position. Reinforce defensive perimeter. I'll keep watch." Just 8 words. Professional, detached, perfect. Morrison smiled grimly. They had a chance now. They just had to survive long enough to use it. 45 minutes later, everything changed. Lynx had relocated to an overwatch position 1,500 meters northwest, a high promontory that gave her commanding views of 3 approaches. She'd been monitoring enemy communications. They were sloppy with radio discipline, probably convinced that the isolated Americans had no way to intercept their transmissions. What she heard made her jaw tighten. The enemy wasn't withdrawing. They were consolidating, and they'd called in reinforcements. Through her scope, she watched the valley below fill with vehicles. 2 armored personnel carriers, a technical truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, and most concerning, a BTR-80 with thermal imaging and a 14.5mm cannon that could shred the rocks protecting Viper Recon. The enemy commander had correctly assessed that he was facing a single sniper. His response was overwhelming firepower and armor she couldn't penetrate with her rifle. Lynx considered her options. She could withdraw, continue her original mission, leave the Americans to face this new threat alone. It would be the logical choice. She'd already violated orders by intervening. Staying would compound that error. She dismissed the thought immediately. New plan. The vehicles were the key. Disable them, and the enemy lost their advantage. But armored targets required different tactics than personnel targets. She studied the BTR through her scope. The commander's hatch was partially open, someone was standing in it, directing the advance. The vehicles were moving slowly up the mountain road, taking their time, confident in their protection. Lynx shifted her aim to the technical truck. The gunner behind the heavy machine gun wasn't wearing a helmet, amateur mistake. She fired. The gunner's body jerked backward. The truck swerved, the driver panicking. Second shot through the windshield, into the driver. The truck veered off the road, crashed into a boulder, and stopped. But the armored personnel carriers kept coming. Lynx tracked the lead APC. She couldn't penetrate the armor, but she didn't need to. Armored vehicles had vulnerable points, vision blocks, external equipment, the commander's hatch. She waited until the APC negotiated a tight turn, its side briefly exposed. Her target was the external fuel tank, a thin metal container attached to the rear quarter panel. The shot was difficult, small target, moving vehicle, extreme range. She compensated for all of it, leading the target by what felt right rather than what any calculation could determine. Fire. The fuel tank ruptured. Diesel sprayed across the vehicle's engine compartment. The APC didn't explode. Movies lied about that, but thick black smoke began pouring from its rear. The vehicle slowed, stopped. The crew bailed out, coughing, trying to assess the damage. Lynx eliminated 2 of them before they reached cover. The second APC's commander made the smart choice and buttoned up, sealing his hatch. The vehicle accelerated, trying to rush through the danger zone. But the BTR commander, perhaps emboldened by his vehicle's armor, remained in his open hatch, shouting orders to his troops. Lynx recognized the tactical opportunity. Take out the command element, and the assault would falter. She shifted position one more time, climbing to an even higher point that gave her a marginal angle advantage. The climb took 90 seconds, time she couldn't afford but had to invest. When she reached the new position, she was breathing hard, her hands less steady than usual. Breathe. Settle. Focus. The BTR was 800 meters away now, closing on Viper Recon's position. The commander was still visible, still directing the attack. Lynx placed the crosshairs on his chest. Something pinged off the rock beside her head. A bullet. Someone had spotted her muzzle flash. The enemy sniper she'd thought she'd eliminated had a partner, and he'd just found her position. Lynx rolled left, as another round cratered the rock where her head had been. She kept rolling, putting 3 meters of distance between herself and her last position, finding cover behind a thick stone column. Her heart rate elevated. Not panic, she didn't panic, but heightened alertness. She'd been made. The advantage of invisibility was gone. Through a gap in the rocks, she glimpsed the enemy sniper. He was good positioned on a cliff face 900 meters south, partially concealed by vegetation, with a clear line of sight to her previous location. He was scanning for her now, trying to reacquire his target. This was the geometry of death. 2 trained snipers, each trying to kill the other across a distance where the smallest error meant failure. No room for hesitation, no second chances. Lynx controlled her breathing. The enemy had one advantage. He knew approximately where she was. She had a different advantage. He didn't know she'd already spotted him. She couldn't move without exposing herself. He couldn't see her without exposing himself. Stalemate. Except the clock was running. The BTR was still advancing. The enemy troops were still closing on Viper Recon. Every second she spent in this duel was a second she wasn't stopping the assault. She needed to end this fast. Lynx studied the terrain between her position and the enemy sniper. A slight depression in the rocks, barely noticeable, ran at an angle that would let her move without silhouetting against the sky. But she'd have to crawl 20 meters to reach a new firing position, 20 meters of movement that might draw his attention. Or she could gamble. She removed her boonie cap and slowly raised it on the muzzle of her rifle, just enough to peek above the rocks. The enemy sniper fired instantly. The cap jerked as the bullet passed through it. Lynx was already moving. While his attention was on the decoy, she'd shifted 3 meters right, rising into a kneeling position with her rifle shouldered. He was good. He recognized the trick. He was pivoting his weapon toward her actual position. They both fired in the same instant. Lynx felt the enemy's bullet pass so close to her face that she felt the pressure wave. Her own shot was true. The enemy sniper arched backward, his rifle falling from the cliff, his body following a second later. No time to confirm. She was already shifting position again, already reacquiring the BTR through her scope. The commander was still in his hatch, but he'd noticed something was wrong. He was starting to duck down, starting to seal the vehicle. 600 meters. The range was closing. In 30 seconds, the BTR would be in position to engage Viper Recon with its cannon. Lynx didn't have 30 seconds. She aimed for the commander's chest as he descended into the hatch. It was a shot measured in inches, a target partially concealed by steel, moving downward, alive for maybe 2 more seconds. She fired. The commander stopped moving. His body slumped across the hatch rim, preventing it from closing. The BTR stopped advancing. Its crew was leaderless, confused, probably arguing about what to do next. Lynx worked the bolt, chambered another round, and started picking off the dismounted infantry that had been following behind the vehicles. They scattered, diving for cover, their advance transformed into chaos. Below, she could see Viper Recon's position. They were still there, still fighting, still alive. Morrison had managed to pull his team back to a more defensible location. Bennett's machine gun was laying down suppressive fire. Even wounded, they were holding. Lynx allowed herself the smallest smile. Then she got back to work. The battlefield fell silent as dawn broke over the drylands. Morrison counted bodies in the gray morning light. 23 enemy casualties visible from their position. More scattered in the rocks below. More still in the valleys where the vehicles had been abandoned. One woman had done this. One sniper had turned a hopeless situation into survival. "Movement on the North Ridge," Walsh called out. His voice was hoarse from shouting commands through the night. "Single person, coming down." Morrison raised his rifle, then lowered it. If she'd wanted them dead, they'd be dead. The figure descended the mountainside with practiced efficiency, taking a path that was probably invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. She moved like she belonged to the rocks themselves, like she'd been carved from the same granite. She emerged from the fog 20 meters away and stopped. Morrison got his first clear look at their savior. She was smaller than he'd expected, maybe 5'6", lean and compact in the way that comes from years of fieldwork. Her face was streaked with dirt and smoke, her eyes hidden behind ballistic sunglasses. Her rifle, an impressive piece of equipment he didn't immediately recognize, hung across her chest. Her uniform bore no unit patches, no rank insignia, nothing that identified her as American military. But the way she carried herself told Morrison everything he needed to know. This was a professional. This was someone who'd done this before. Viper Recon? Her voice was quiet, controlled. She wasn't even breathing hard despite the climb down. "That's us. I'm Sergeant Morrison, acting commander." He moved closer. "You saved our lives. We owe you everything." She shook her head slightly. "You held your ground. I just evened the odds." That's one hell of an understatement. Walsh limped forward, his broken arm now splinted. "I counted at least 20 confirmed eliminations. In the dark, in these conditions, that's not evening odds. That's rewriting them." The woman didn't respond to the praise. She was already scanning the perimeter, checking threats, maintaining situational awareness. "Your reinforcements will be here in 15 minutes. I monitored their frequency. Will you stay? They'll want to debrief you, thank you properly." "Negative. I have my own mission to complete." She pulled a small medical kit from her pack and handed it to Morrison. "For your wounded. Military-grade coagulant and antibiotics. Your corporal needs them." Morrison took the kit, wanted to say something adequate to the moment, but what words existed for this? "At least tell us your name. Your unit. Something so we can." "Lynx." She said it like it was the only name that mattered. Maybe it was. That's all you need to know. She turned to leave, then paused. "You fought well, Sergeant. Your team has discipline. They'll tell stories about this night. They'll tell stories about you." She smiled for the first time, a brief expression that transformed her face from cold professionalism to something almost human. "No, they won't, because this never happened." With that, she started back up the mountain. Within 30 seconds, she'd vanished into the fog and rocks, as if she'd never been there at all. Bennett spoke into the silence. "Did that just happen?" Morrison looked at the medical kit in his hands, at the bodies scattered across the battlefield, at his team still breathing when they should have been dead. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It happened." In the distance, he heard the rotors of incoming helicopters. They'd made it. Against all odds, they'd survived. 3 days later, at Forward Operating Base Granite, Morrison sat across from a colonel he'd never met. "Your after-action report is unusual, Sergeant." The colonel set down the tablet, studying Morrison with the expression of someone trying to decide if he was being lied to. "You claim a single unidentified sniper eliminated approximately 28 hostile combatants, disabled 3 armored vehicles, and then disappeared without debriefing." "Yes, sir, that's accurate." "And you never saw her credentials? Never confirmed her unit assignment?" "She didn't provide any information beyond a call sign. Lynx." The colonel leaned back. "There is no operator with that designation in any unit assigned to this theater. We've checked with JSOC, with SOCOM, with every Special Operations Command in the region." Morrison had expected this. "With respect, sir, I know what I saw. My entire team will verify it." "Oh, they already have. Identical stories, which is either confirmation or the most elaborate cover story I've encountered in 20 years of service." The colonel stood, walked to the window overlooking the base. "Here's what's going to happen, Sergeant. Your team is being awarded the Bronze Star for Valor Under Fire. Your report will be classified and filed under a different designation. And officially, Viper Recon was extracted by helicopter after successfully evading a superior enemy force." "Sir, that's how it happened." The colonel's voice was firm. "Because the alternative creates questions I'm not authorized to answer, and you're not authorized to ask." Morrison understood. Some operations were so classified that acknowledging their existence was itself forbidden. If Lynx was real, and he knew she was, then she operated in shadows so deep that even her rescues had to be denied. "One more thing, Sergeant." The colonel returned to his desk, pulled out a folder. "This arrived this morning. No return address. Just a note that said it was for the team from Viper Recon." Inside, the folder was a photograph. Lynx, standing on a mountain ridge at sunset, her rifle slung across her back, her face turned away from the camera. Below the image, handwritten in precise lettering, "Where others see only darkness, I see the path forward." Morrison stared at the photograph. It was proof she existed, proof she was real, proof that somewhere in these mountains a quiet woman with extraordinary skill was still operating, still watching, still protecting soldiers who would never know her name. "Keep it or don't," the colonel said. "But remember, officially, she doesn't exist." "Yes, sir." That evening, Morrison gathered Viper Recon in a tent away from curious ears. He showed them the photograph. Davis, still recovering from surgery, touched the image with trembling fingers. Chen, awake now and expected to make a full recovery, studied it with wonder. Bennett, Walsh, Webb, Hayes, they all looked at the woman who'd saved them. "She's still out there," Morrison said, "still doing whatever mission brought her to these mountains. We'll probably never see her again, but we'll remember." They all nodded. Someone would ask, someday, how Viper Recon survived that night. They'd tell the official story, clever tactics, strong defensive positions, enemy mistakes. They'd leave out the truth, but among themselves, in quiet moments, they'd remember the figure on the northern ridge. They'd remember the impossible shots. They'd remember that when everything was darkest, when death seemed certain, someone had been watching. Someone had been waiting. And when they'd called for help, she'd answered, not with words, with action. Silent, deadly, uncompromising. The legend of Lynx had begun.